Great. Give me 1 second, just bringing up the presentation. Great. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
And you could see my screen okay?
Yep, we're all good. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Welcome everyone. My name is Tiffany Oscar. Today we are talking about demystifying student loans for social work students. I know student loans can be a very confusing process for a lot of us. I mean, it was for me, especially when I first started, when I first graduated. And it's been a very long journey. But I've learned a lot over the years, and I've been able to talk to a lot of different social workers to help me better understand like what is it that we are experiencing. So for today, I know it's a small group of us, so we could do just a quick introduction, and then we'll talk about the relationship. And so I think that this is the best way to categorize your the dynamic between you and your student loans and your employers is just to look at it as if it were one relationship, and then we'll talk about as a part of the relationship, the student loan repayment process, the employer's role, and then managing the relationship. And then I'll open up for any questions. Oops. Okay, so this is me, and I felt like the best way to introduce myself was to kind of talk about my work history over the last 15 years since I graduated with my master's Master in Science and Social Work from the Steve Hicks School of Social Work. And when I went to school, my focus was on macro practice. So all the classes that I took were macro focused. But then as I was getting closer to graduating, I decided that I wanted to get a little bit of direct practice experience so that I can have um, more understanding of the clients and the issues. And so later I realized I didn't really need to do this, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. So I would say like maybe the first 5 years, 5 or so years of my career, I did your traditional social work jobs. I had about 6 jobs across 3 different states. So first I started out in Houston. I finished my master's with the internship at the VA hospital in Houston. And then I took a case management job. I worked for, I think, the Department of Aging and Disability Services. I did that briefly. Then I took a temp job at the Housing Authority for the city of Houston, working in the Family Self-Sufficiency Program. And then I decided I wanted to move to New Orleans because it was a few years after Hurricane Katrina. And I spoke with one of my social work professors, and they thought it would be a good idea just to kind of see social work from the ground up. And so they thought that New Orleans would be a good place. And I was open to moving outside of Texas anyway. So I was like, sure, why not? So I moved to New Orleans. I was there for a couple of years, I think from 2009 until I think 2012. And I had a few different jobs. I did outpatient mental health where I was a therapist for a few months. And then they closed. And then I took another job as a very briefly for school social work. And then I landed working for a year as a case manager with Healthy Start, which is where I started to work really with immigrant women who were undocumented and who were pregnant and parenting. And immigrants and refugees was my chosen population when I was in school. I had learned Spanish, and so I really wanted to connect with this particular population. So this was like my first job where I was able to use Spanish and really interact with my clients. I also did like a part-time job working at Covenant House, which is a homeless shelter for youth. So I did that for a few years. And then I decided I was ready to move because I wanted to see something different. So I moved to DC and I had a job working as in a foster care program with unaccompanied refugee minors. I did that for a couple of years. And then at that point, I was starting to reach burnout because I was doing so much direct practice. And I think I wasn't really focusing on what I felt, I wanted to do. And I was ready to start making that transition. So the easiest way for me to make that transition was I took a job in the agency I was working for. They had a training position open. And so I applied for that, got that position, and I was doing training for our foster care parents and for the staff in the program. So I was managing all of the training. I was facilitating the trainings, developing and designing trainings, managing, as we were majority social workers. So I was managing our CEUs, making sure that everyone had enough CEUs to renew their license. All the contracts we had that were specific to training, I was doing that. And then after that experience, I did that for a couple of years and I decided, oh, this would be a good idea. I like training. What if I worked, if I did training at like outside of social work and I just maybe, and so I was trying to figure out, well, how would I do that? And so I saw a lot of training jobs were kind of nestled under HR. So I took a job eventually working in HR as an HR coordinator, and I realized I learned a lot. I wasn't able to do as much training, but I was able to do a lot of like the operations side and HR, your benefit management. I was facilitating the biweekly orientations that we had. And so it kind of exposed me to a different side of working with my degree and using some of those, leveraging my skill set as a social worker in a different environment. But I think ultimately I realized it just wasn't a good fit working in HR. There's a lot of differences coming from working. A lot of the social work values that we have don't necessarily align 100% with working in HR. And so I thought, it was best that I make a transition. So I went back into social work because at that time I had a clinical license. And I worked in the school setting again for about a year. And then I transitioned to hospice social worker, and that was my first time working with older adults. And from there, our hospice transitioned to a foundation. And so that's kind of where I am now. And I've been doing that for the past 5 years. So as you can see, you have this idea of what your career will be, but you just never know. And I'm one of those people where I just kind of followed what I wanted to do. As you could see, I've had at least 11 jobs or 12 jobs, I would say, over the past 15 years. And so I was never shy about following what I thought was right for me and right for my career. And that I think ultimately it served me well because this is essentially what I wanted to focus on, working with organizations. I didn't know anything about philanthropy, but I feel like where I am now is like a perfect fit for this stage in my career and where I want to go moving forward. So I'll pause there because I said a lot. And I know that I just want to make sure if anyone has any questions before I move on. Great.
Well, in the chat, Sandy said, "What an incredible career journey," and it truly is. It's like it's you know uh it's from macro to micro, and I think that's like really important to kind of see like these journeys are very it's not linear. So
100% true. It is not linear at all. And this is the beauty of our profession. There's a lot of things that you could do. And so I'll talk about that in this presentation as well. You're not just confined. I know in the beginning, we only think you can only do a job that says social work in it. in the title, but there's just so many more opportunities that are available to us where we have the transferable skills. And, unfortunately, we're not always taught that. And so I just kind of stumbled upon that because I was always looking for something different. And I was always trying to figure out, okay, how can I have a larger impact, with the skills that I have? So along my career journey, I realized that it's really a relationship that you have with your student loans, and the whole repayment process. You have to look at it as a relationship. And I think looking at it that way, then you could start to see how our social work skills fit along the journey. And so there's kind of elements to the relationship. There's an emotional roller coaster. You are in it for the long term, whether or not you want to be, you are committed to it. It is a long-term relationship and it is a rule-based relationship. So, a lot of us are familiar with cognitive distortions, and there's a lot of cognitive distortions that we have that causes us to go on this emotional roller coaster when we graduate and we realize, you have $100,000 of student loan debt or 75,000 or whatever the number is. You start to feel a lot of shame and guilt around having this much student loan debt, especially if you come from a family where, no one in your family has debt to this degree. And it's just such a large amount of money that you just cannot fathom, like, how will I ever pay this off? How will I ever make enough money? And I think, what feeds into that as well is our profession. We're really taught, to value social justice, value the human relationships, and that we're doing this because we want to have a change. We want to impact change in society, and we're not doing this for money. And so I think that mentality of prioritizing the needs of others and the client relationship before our own needs, you start to feel even more shame and guilt when you may start to experience burnout or start to think about doing something beyond the traditional social work role. You may feel like, well, this isn't what I went to school for, and well, why can't I? But you really have to understand, this is a part of the emotional roller coaster of the relationship that you're in. And then the last part is the unknown salary projection. You know, in your 20s, your salary is a little bit lower, but your peak earning years are really that 45 to 54. So for a lot of us, we don't really start to see a higher income until we continue to progress in our career. So the first couple of years, you may be making whatever the base salary is. I believe it's like 40 or 50 something thousand dollars now. And then as you progress, naturally your income should increase as long as you are doing the things you need to do to progress in your career. And we could certainly talk about that if you all have any questions. And feel free to interrupt me at any point if you have questions. So another aspect of this relationship is that there will be legal woes. I am in the repayment process, so I within in the second career or the first career transition, I went back to school to get a master's in public administration. And so that increased the amount of student loan debt. I think at one point I had like $170,000 in student loan debt. But last year I received forgiveness for my undergrad and my master's in social work degree. And I think that was about maybe 80, like $75,000 that was forgiven over, since I graduated in 2009. So, doing the math, 2009 to 2023, that's obviously longer than the 10-year time span. But as you saw my career trajectory, I was kind of in and out of nonprofits, and I was not always paying on my student loans, but we'll talk about that later. So the current legal woe of this relationship is that for the SAVE plan, which is what I'm in now, trying to get the remaining balance of my student loans forgiven for my second master's, there was a lawsuit that was initiated in July, and the rationale behind the lawsuit is that they felt like this new SAVE plan that President Biden created kind of goes beyond what the income-driven repayment plans are supposed to do. And so they're essentially saying, you know, you're overstepping the reach of what these plans were designed to do. And the elements of the plan that they're questioning, which is what he changed, was that now these plans have an interest subsidy. This particular plan has an interest subsidy. And what that means is that if you notice, a lot of people's loan balance increases over time, and that's because the interest rate is steadily accruing, whether or not your monthly payments are covering your principal and interest. So every month your interest is accruing, and so usually what happens is a lot of us end up with balances that are far greater than what we initially took out. So this interest subsidy essentially would pay for the remaining interest that your monthly payment doesn't cover. And this is to reduce or prevent your student loan balance from continuing to grow, which I think is a wonderful idea. And then it reduces the payment amount. I believe currently it's capped at 10% of your discretionary income, but for some people, this could go down to 5%, which would mean certain people may have a 0 monthly payment or a much lower monthly payment. And then you would have eventual forgiveness after 20 to 25 years. And I'll talk about the plans in just a minute. I'll skip over this one since it's not that relevant. And then long-term commitment. So the average time frame that people take to pay off their student loans is about 20 years, and that's either forgiveness or payoff. So that's a very long time if you're thinking about it. But I think if you are able to be strategic, if you're able to use your case management skills and all the skills you learned as a social worker, you can most certainly do this within the 10 to 15 year time frame, which is what I was able to do. And then the second statistic basically says that most people who are eligible to apply for the public student loan forgiveness program don't actually apply. And they didn't really talk about the reasons, but I think part of it is that people probably don't know they're eligible, or they're just not tracking at all, or they're not even paying their student loans. So it's just kind of out of sight, out of mind. And I'll pause here to see Erin, or if we have any questions.
Well, let's see if there's any questions. You can drop them in the chat. We're happy to read them out, or if you want to unmute. Otherwise, we'll keep going.
Perfect. So I think the most important rules that you need to understand is, and these are kind of the reasons and rationales why a lot of people are not able to get their student loans forgiven, is because there's a lot of, well, I don't want to say a lot, but there's paperwork involved, and sometimes people are not always completing the paperwork correctly. But I know as social workers, this is not going to be an issue for us because we are very used to and accustomed to creating treatment plans and case plans for our clients. So I know this is not an issue for us. Insufficient payment history. So understanding that it doesn't matter if you've worked for 10 years, you must have made 120 payments. So if you've worked for 10 years and you've not made 120 payments, then you're not eligible to apply for the public student loan forgiveness program. And then the last point is that some people are applying and their loans aren't eligible. And this program is mainly for your direct loans and your consolidated loans. And so we'll talk about that a little bit later. Select your repayment plan is the second part. So now that you have an idea of the relationship that you're in, that, I hope this is starting to paint the picture that you'll definitely have to go in this and be organized and be prepared to manage your student loans. This is a very active process. It's because it's a long-term process. A lot of times we can forget what we need to do, but you want to make sure that you are organized. That's the first step. So the repayment plans, we'll talk about your private loans, the government repayment options, public student loan forgiveness program, and then your employer education programs. So
Oh,
private
Tiffany,
loans,
Tiffany,
yes,
before we go on, there's a question in the chat.
sure.
For the 120 payments, is that once a month or could it be sped up by paying minimum more often? This is a question from Emily.
So they cannot be sped up. It has to be 120 months, which is like essentially 10 years. So that's the way that the program is designed. Like you cannot achieve forgiveness in less than 10 years. Even if you if you make additional payments, it won't count because it's part of it is that you have to be employed for a certain amount of time. So that's a great question, but unfortunately, it has to be there's no way to expedite the process. Um, any other questions? Great. So, private loans, my presentation is focused on your federal government loans, which is and specifically the Public Student Loan Forgiveness Program. If you have private loans, none of this information applies, unfortunately. You will need to contact your lender to talk about the repayment process. So for example, if you all recall during the pandemic, a lot of student loans were in forbearance. That forbearance was for folks who have federal loans. So anything that the government does is only for your federal loans. Anything that's private loans, you would have to directly speak to the bank or the lender in order to get more information on that. And I don't believe they have any type of programs that would expedite the payoff. I don't believe there's any forgiveness programs for private student loans. From my understanding, essentially you'll have to pay back pretty much everything. But if you have an employer that offers uh, student loan payment assistance, then that may be able to help you. So if you have specific questions about that, I can talk more. So I just listed here your federal, your student loan services. So for most of us who have our federal loans, these are the 7 student loan services that will have your loans once you graduate. It's important to know this information. They do change. So when I first started, I believe my loans was with Ed Financial. And then once I entered into the Public Student Loan Forgiveness Program, it switched to, I can't remember, I forget the name of the servicer it switched to. And then last year, my loan switched to Mohila. And now my loans are currently with Mohila and the federal government. So there are some issues with Mohila. And so now while they are kind of managing my loans, the federal government is also taking a more active role. So there's a lot of change that you need to be aware of if you're going to go through any of the income-based repayment plans, which I'll talk about now. So essentially for your federal loans, there's 2 kind of types of plans. You have the fixed plan and then your income-driven plans. For people who are interested in a public student loan forgiveness program, most of your plans are going to fall under the income-driven plans, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. The fixed plans, these are not based on your income. These are more so based on the time that it takes to pay the loan off. So if you have, so for example, the standard plan is designed for you to pay off your entire student loan balance in 10 years. So let's say I have $100,000 in student loans. If I'm on the standard repayment plan, they are going to issue my monthly payments so that I pay off probably about $10,000 in student loans a year so that I can complete that $100,000 balance within the 10-year time frame. And that's, this is just a very round number just to give you an example. I'm not factoring in interest rates accruing and anything like that, but the fixed plans, you will pay off your entire student loan balance. And then the graduated plan is a little bit different. It basically, you pay a certain amount for the first 2 years, and then the monthly payments increase over time until you essentially pay off the student loan, your student loan balance. And then the extended plan is kind of like a combo of the standard and graduated, but it gives you more time to pay off your student loan balance. So this is obviously not recommended if you're doing the public student loan forgiveness program, because A, your payments are going to be much higher, and B, you will pay off the entire balance within that 10 to 20, or if you have consolidated loans, possibly 30 years. So it just depends. Your income-driven plans, these are the plans that I've been on for, since I graduated in 2009. So at first, my first student loans, the ones that that were just forgiven, I think I was on at first I may have been in the early years, I may have been either on the IBR or ICR, which is number 3 and 4. And then I realized my payments could be much lower if I chose the repay, which is currently now the save plan. So what happens is that the save plan is essentially the lowest monthly payment that you will have, because it factors in, I believe, about 10% of your income, your discretionary income. So your payments are really at their lowest on this particular plan. And then as your income increases, or as you change plans, then then your monthly payments increase. So you may be asking yourself, why would you choose the SAVE plan over another plan, or why not choose another plan? I think this current lawsuit that's happening is probably one reason that people may not want to choose the SAVE plan, because it is subject to a lot of scrutiny when the government makes these types of changes to the plan, and then you have a lawsuit, which is happening now. So now my loans have been in forbearance for the past couple of months, which means, there's options that I can use on the back end to account for these. What has it been? This is the 3rd month now. So there's options I can use on the back end to account for this, but it's more work. So it's really a matter of preference, which one you choose. There's a student loan tool that I'll talk about a little bit later, where you can use it to determine, it'll show you your monthly payments for each of these plans. And then you could just select whichever one you want. Like, you don't have to explain why you want, this year you're choosing the standard, and then 5 years from now you're choosing save or pay. It's really up to you which one you want to do. But obviously you want to have a strategy of when you want to have these paid off. Your public student loan forgiveness program. So these are your kind of like the overview. If you had to walk away with anything, I think this is probably one of the key slides that you want to focus on. So here you're looking at your loan type. These are the loans that are eligible for this program. So when you graduate and you're looking at your loans, you're calling your federal student loan servicer, you want to ask them, okay, what loans do I have? And actually, this information is available in the studentaid.gov website now, so you could log in and check it on your own. We'll talk about like job hunting and what you need to look for, but you need to make sure your employer is a nonprofit, or it's a government agency, or it could be a hospital or university, but there's a certain type of employer that's accepted in this. If you're going into private practice or thinking about private practice for yourself, the chances of you being able to do this program are very slim because typically private practice businesses are not nonprofits. So therefore it would not be eligible for this program, but we could talk about an alternative. You must work 30 hours. So if you have two part-time jobs where you're working 15 to 20 hours for each job, you can combine those two and it would work. Um, if you and you have to be employed at the time of your application. So the next one talks about the 120 qualifying payments. They don't have to be consistent payments. So if you change jobs like I did, I worked at a nonprofit, and then when I was in HR, it obviously was not I wasn't working for a nonprofit. I was working for a traditional business. So that year that I worked for that business, I was not eligible. I was making my monthly payments, right? Because that's what I'm supposed to do. But those payments did not count towards the 120 payments. So that means essentially I lost a year, but I don't regret it. It was something that I wanted to do, and I'm glad that I was able to make that transition and try something new for myself. Obviously, you want to pay the full amount shown on the bill, and then you have to be in one of these repayment plans. So any of the income-based repayment plans is eligible for this. And here, I'll just go quickly here. I just took a screenshot so that you could see. This is also an important one. So you can see what the form looks like. This is the second page, and this is where you really, they're asking you all those questions that I just had on the previous slide. So number 2 asks for the employer identification number, and there's actually a tool on the studentaid.gov website where you can type in your employer's EIN number to see if they are eligible, if they're a nonprofit, and it'll tell you right then and there if this employer is considered eligible in a nonprofit. They're asking for your employer's address, website, if they, and then your start and begin date. This is how they're going to calculate how many payments you've made that are considered eligible. So whatever your employer puts for the start and end date, they're going to use that to determine, okay, how many payments you made during that time, and these payments will be considered eligible. Again, it must be a full-time, you must be employed full-time in order for those payments to count. So even if your employer is a nonprofit, you're making your payments. If you're not working full-time, or if you're not working 2 part-time jobs to reach those 30 hours, then it will not qualify. And so here they ask specifically, how many hours per week are you working? And then this is where they're trying to find out the type of employer you have. So it'll tell you automatically, okay, if you're working for a government organization, check, you can skip, you skip to section 4, which is this bottom part where the official signs it. And so this form, obviously, this page is not completed by you, it's completed by your employer. But let's say you don't work for a government organization, then you would skip to number 10. And number 10 is asking, okay, do you work for a nonprofit, a tax-exempt organization that's considered a 501c3? If you say yes, great, move on to the next. If you say no, then you have to go to number 11. So it's just kind of asking you all the questions to find out what type of employer you have. And if you're not working for a government organization, you're not working for a 501c3, you're not working for a not-for-profit, that it's still a not-for-profit, but maybe it's not a 501c3, right? So, and then it'll ask you, okay, well, if that's not the case, then is your employer a partisan political organization? And then they'll say, if you say yes, okay, it doesn't qualify. But they're trying to get you to see what they're looking for. So it's very clear. This is the exact form that I filled out for every one of the employers that I worked for. Questions so far? Great. And so if you are if you're considering opening a private practice, then you want to pay special attention to this. So as an employer, you have the option to offer an educational assistance program to your employees, which would be you in that particular case. And the maximum you can offer is $5,250. And essentially, you could use this to pay for your own student loans. You would have to build this into your budget as you're planning for your business. You need to make sure that you can allocate this $5,000 from the revenue that you're generating, whether you're doing therapy with clients or maybe you're doing trainings, whatever it is that you're doing in your private practice. You want to make sure that you have enough to pay for, to contribute your student towards student loans as an employer. And then as an employee or as an individual, you can continue to make your monthly payments and contribute even more. So this, obviously, you're not in the public student loan forgiveness program, but this is just your another way that you can contribute to paying off your student loans in a little bit quicker time frame. So I'm going to pause here and do a time check, Erin.
Yeah, we can go a little bit over if you'd like, because I know we got a bit of a late start. And we had like one person join us a little bit later. So yeah, we can keep going.
Okay, great. So I'm going to skip through. I talked a little bit more in the last couple of slides about the employer, so I won't go too far into these. Um, but what I want everyone to start to understand, and what I was trying to show in the beginning, was that there's so many different types of nonprofits that you can work for, and that it's not really about what you're doing for the nonprofit. It's really about, is this a nonprofit? Is this a government organization? Is this an eligible organization? So if you're thinking about the student loan forgiveness program, I want you to think more broadly about what you can do as a social worker, and not just limit yourself to only doing traditional social work roles, because there's so many different areas where your skill set will be valuable to these different organizations. And so here I'm just talking a little bit more about that. Since the focus is on the employer, you could do anything at this organization. You could do your traditional social work jobs. You could work as a receptionist. If you decide, hey, I would like to do marketing for a social service agency, you could do that. Or you want to do social media. Maybe you want to work in IT. I'm actually managing our grant management system, which is crazy to think of as a social worker, but I'm managing the entire system. And it's a normal part of my job. It's not a social work job, but this is what I do, and my social work skills are very much transferable and applicable here. So I want us to start to think about, what is it that we can do? And I think this is important because sometimes we start to reach a point in our career where we want to try something different, and we don't know what we can do. We only think we could do the social work jobs, but there's so many different areas that you could do. The second thing I want us to start to think about is, as you progress in your career, we are a very value-based profession, but life happens and normal life transitions happen. And so our priorities shift and what we're focusing on shifts. So in the beginning of my career, in the beginning of your career, which is where most of you are, you're client focused. The first 2 to 3 years of your career, you are very much embedded in the types of jobs that you're doing, making sure you're working with the population you studied in school. You want to help your clients accomplish whatever it is that you feel is important. I would say that's kind of the first phase of our career. And then once you start to get to like year 4, your life transitions start to happening. You are more concerned about your health. You want to focus on This is your late 20s, early 30s. You're thinking about your health. You're starting to remember any dreams that you had when you first went into social work. You're thinking about your goals. Now that you've been working for a few years, your perspective may change. What you want to focus on may change. And at this point, if you're not in like serious or long-term relationships, this is where a lot of people start to enter into those relationships where they may consider getting married or thinking about more of the long term. And this is now expanding how you're focusing on your career. So at first it was just client. Now you're incorporating yourself. Okay, what is it that I want from my career? And then I would say the third transition, and there's more after this, but this is kind of where I am. And that's once you start to get to year 9 and above, you're starting to look at your career and your life more as your legacy. So it's not just about the clients that you're helping, but what is the legacy I want to leave behind as a social worker? And what is the legacy I want to have for my family? Here, most people, if they don't have kids, they're starting to have kids. You're thinking even more strategically about your career. So maybe you're not wanting to work directly with clients. Maybe you're wanting to work with organizations, work on policy issues. You're trying to shift how you can use your knowledge that you've acquired over the last 8 years. You may be purchasing a home at this stage if you haven't already. You're thinking more about vacations. You're valuing your time a lot differently. You're thinking about retirement because you don't want to work forever, right? So you're now that retirement planning is coming into play. And for as you're entering into your 40s and 50s, you start to look at, your parents and how your parents are doing and, what help your parents may need and who's providing that help to your parents. So just over time, the things that happen in your life causes you to shift how you perceive the values that you once held at the beginning of your career. And I want to say, especially a lot of times career transitions happen because we may get burned out. And that's kind of how the narrative is focused in our profession. But really, it's far more than just being burned out. It's really about just your natural progression of life and what's important to you. It's not always about being burned out. You're thinking more strategically and globally about what is it that you want from your life and what is the legacy that you want to leave. I think I talked about this a little bit already.
Tiffany, I just wanted to say thank you for kind of putting that into words because this is something that I often talk about with students and alumni of thinking, more holistically about your career journey, but then also of like you're a person and I always use the analogy of like, when you're on the plane, you got to put the oxygen mask on yourself before you help others. And it's like you're by thinking strategically about like your where you are in life, you're also better able to help other people. So I thank you for highlighting that.
Oh, absolutely. And that's, I think that's super important as you're talking about managing your student loans because as through this process, you will change jobs. And so you need to be considerate of what type of job you want to have, what type of employer you're working for, how are you keeping everything organized and on track. I think sometimes, when we think about changing jobs, we automatically just assume that if we leave our social service organization, then we're out of public student loan forgiveness or there's no other alternatives. And I want people to understand that there are plenty of alternatives as long as you're thinking strategically and planning ahead about what it is that you're doing and what it is that you want to do. I think that the other thing I'll say before I end this is that really what I've learned over the past 15 years is that this program is actually quite simple. Once you understand, like, you have to do a little bit of case management as a social worker, and that's a skill set that we already have. as long as you're applying those skills that you use with your clients and to manage cases, or whether you're doing therapy, or you're working in a non-traditional setting, as long as you're applying those skills and you're staying on top of it, there's no way you won't be able to achieve student loan forgiveness or pay off your loans. It's just, you just have to be in the right mindset from the beginning. I'll end with a few resources here. The Public Student Loan Forgiveness Employer Search, which is what I highlighted. This is on the federal studentaid.gov website. They also have a loan simulator, which is what I talked about a little bit earlier. And that's where you could see, based on your loan amount, how much your monthly payments will be for each plan. I was just doing this last night. I recommend that you all go on the website and try out the simulator. It's called a simulator because it's not permanent. So whatever you put in there, it's not going to track it and keep it. It's just for you to see and get an idea of like how much of your student loan payments are. So there's no guessing involved in this process. You'll know exactly. And then Savvy or Savi, I'm not sure the correct way to pronounce it. This is a resource that's promoted by the NASW. And essentially, this is like a concierge service that helps you manage your student loans. And so you pay a monthly fee to them, and they can help you communicate with your student loan servicer. They can help you navigate this process. You are still responsible for your student loans. If they make a mistake, it is still your responsibility. It's just an additional resource. If you feel like I'm overwhelmed, there's no way I could do this on my own, just know that there are resources available. And I'll pause here to see if there's any questions.
Savannah in the chat says, thank you. This is very helpful. Oh, that was a question for me. Do you know when the recording will be available? Usually it'll take about it'll be up on the YouTube page probably before the end of the week. So I would say be on the lookout for it either Thursday or Friday this week.
Great. And I'm going to pause the recording because I'd like to just kind of talk to the students who are present.